Hi, this is Jill Peck from Channel 8 Cable News in Longmont, Colorado. Today we're talking to Vern Zurich, who is also called Thunder. He was sworn in at 17 but went into active duty at 18. So tell me why you were assigned to the Air Corps and what were your duties?
Well, it turns out that coming from Louisville, I didn't know much about the ocean. A lot of our friends went and signed up with the Navy, but I, coming from this land area, I chose the Army, went to Denver, took the exam for the Army Air Corps, passed it because we had good teachers in Louisville, and I was sworn in, and the colonel came and said, "We'll be calling you and go home and get prepared." But then he looked at the service record he gave me and said 17. He said, "Oh, you're too young. We've sworn you in, but we won't call you to active duty for another year." But I graduated from high school in June, and on July 20th, I was on a troop train on the way to basic training in Miami Beach, Florida.
So what did you do first?
Well, since I was in high school without any college, I went to, after basic training in Miami Beach, they sent me to Springfield College, Massachusetts. And that's where basketball originated. So to get some extra college, but then it wasn't too long. I was on my way to Nashville, Tennessee, and then to Alabama, where I went to pre-flight school, and then to Florida again, where I went into gunnery school. Finally, navigation school at Hondo, Texas, and then on the way to Walla Walla, Washington, where I was a navigator on a B-24 bomber.
Did you ever get airsick?
I think I did. We had a funny breakfast one time, and we were still cadets flying in twin-engine planes, and we were over the Grand Canyon, and it was rough. And boy, did I! All of us everybody on the plane got sick except the pilot himself.
I signed up for service on my 18th birthday, July 20th, 1943. It's a long story, but I was in the Navy and a Navy hospital corpsman with the 5th Fleet Amphibious Marine Force throughout the South Pacific. When you're 18, you sign up, and then you're sent induction paperwork. I lived at that time in Decatur, Illinois, which was a county seat. And what happened is that the Wabash Railroad had a train schedule from Chicago all through Illinois on into St. Louis and Kansas City. And so what happened was when they had the inductions, why then there was probably 50 or so people in my Macon County induction. So what happened, they got the induction, you was told to report to the Wabash Railroad, and I think it was like 2:30 in the morning. And we all met there, and we was met by military police, and they had a roll call. They put you on a train, and they picked up different people as the train went toward Dearborn Station in Chicago at the induction center. And so that's how it happened. We get to the induction center, and we again were met by military police. They called off the roll and told us we were going to walk about 10 blocks to the induction center, and that happened to be a large ballroom of a major hotel in downtown Chicago, just off of State Street. And so they had all kinds of desks, like tables, 6 feet of tables, one after another on down. And so they ran you through the medical thing, and doctors all gave you medical clearance, and if you cleared, you went to the next thing. They had tables setting Army, Navy, Marine Corps, so forth. And so you went to each one, and they asked you questions and this, that, and the other. And so I got down to the Army Air Corps, and they talked to me a while, and they said, "Oh, you're going to be a bombardier." I said, "Well, I'll be darned. I don't know anything about that. We'll teach you." I said, "Okay." So I go on down through, and I got down to the Navy thing, and they again questioned, "Well, you're going to go in the Navy." I said, "Well, I'll be darned. I was just in the I would be a bombardier a while ago. Now I'm in the Navy. So anyway, I thought, well, that's pretty good because Decatur, Illinois is only 180 miles south of Great Lakes. That's pretty good. Well, you're going to go to Farragut, Idaho for boot camp. So I said, well, okay. So anyway, that's kind of how I happened to get into the Navy.
And my uncle was in the First World War. That's where I got my inspiration from Uncle Walter. His picture was in my grandma's bedroom, and she always had that picture above her bed. It's about this high, and it's an oval shape. And this is where I got my desire to join the Marine Corps, because I wanted to be like him. And boy, he's standing there like a statue, you know, with a brim hat on, leggings up to his knees, you know, and pockets clear down to, to the top of his knees. I didn't have any high school experience, and I quit in the 8th grade. I gathered myself together, and I went over to the door, and she said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm quitting school." Bang, and I shut the door and walked out. I went back home to Mitchell, South Dakota, and I went back to high school. I got myself through high school. Oh, by the way, the 5th Division is the biggest division in the Marine Corps, and that's where I ended up. I ended up in the 5th Division. I also ended up in the Carlson Raiders. I enlisted there in San Diego, and so I had quite an experience with the Carlson Raiders. I had them put a picture on the front of my book, Steel Amtrak.
I was 18 in 1944. I graduated high school in January of 44, and I started college, but I wanted to go into the service. It was in the middle of the war. I was a kid to begin with, but I wasn't a kid at that point. I was a kid at 18. I considered myself a kid in those days. And so I enlisted in the Navy. And 2 weeks before my 18th birthday. And on my 18th birthday, day after it, I was called up for active duty. I mean, I knew I was. They gave me the 2 weeks off to straighten out whatever I had to straighten out in my life so that I can go into the service. And Cinco de Mayo, May 5th is my birthday, and May 6th, I was in boot camp. And exactly a month later, June 6th, we went into Europe, into the war. And we had D-Day. And naturally, I wasn't involved in it. I was still in boot camp. I was a kid. I was in boot camp. I was stationed up in New York at a camp called Samson, which turned later, many years later, into an Air Force base, and now I don't think it exists anymore. It's in Geneva, New York, on the Finger Lakes. There's 5 lakes that look like fingers, and Lake Seneca, one of the fingers, is where Geneva is located, at the bottom part of it, and that's where camp was.
I was 17, I just graduated from high school, and in 1943, and I'd come out to Denver here, and I was working out here just for about 6 weeks, and on a Friday noon I decided to go down and enlist in the Navy, because come September I'd be 18, and then you're subject for the draft after that, and I didn't want to go in the Army. So I went down and joined the Navy, and I passed all the physicals except my weight. I was very, very thin, only weighed 107 pounds, and 108 was the minimum for my height. So they said, we'll hold your exams and everything open until Monday morning, and you can come back and see if you can pass. So I went home and bought a dozen bananas, and ate 6 of them before I went to bed that night. I ate the other 6 on my way back downtown. So I went down and passed, and that was it. We were aboard a troop train the following Thursday, just 5 days after I enlisted. And we were heading for Farragut, Idaho, about 75 of us. And that's where a boot camp is at, where all servicemen have to go to for 8 weeks or whatever for training. And we got as far as Reno, Nevada, and they got word that the boot camp at Farragut was quarantined. Never did find out why, but they didn't know what to do with us, so they sent us on to San Francisco. So we got there, and they still didn't know what to do with it, so they started splitting us all up. 4 of us here, 6 or 7 there, and so on. So 5 days after I joined the Navy, I was aboard a ship in San Francisco Harbor.
No boot camp.
No boot camp. I was one of few of many, many million servicemen that never went to boot camp. So I don't know how to handle a rifle or anything like you had to do. So anyway, I went out to a base called Tiburon in San Francisco Bay, and it was a naval net tender bay. And what we did, our boats would go out and inspect the submarine nets across the bay, and we'd go out and lift them up to see if they were whole and weren't damaged and all that kind of stuff. So that's what we did.
I enlisted. I was 17 years old. I went to a Catholic high school in Chadron, Nebraska, and we had a holy day that we had to observe on December 8th. And after we found out the attack on December 7th, on December the 8th, I went down and enlisted. Three other fellows and I from school went down and enlisted. The recruiter called my father and told him that Frankie is down here and enlisted, and I was going to sign him up. I want to know what you think about it. Now, I didn't know this until after the war, but the recruiter and my father were friendly because they were in the VFW together, and they used to attend the meetings. And so Dad said, I don't care if he joins, but I want him to graduate. So he told him, tell him that he needs glasses and he can't get in the Navy. So that was what I had to live with from December 8th till June. He just said, you got to get your eyes fixed. And so I think I bought a case of carrot juice or something and tried to correct my own. I was going to get in because I wanted to fight the war. And anyway, I didn't graduate till May 31st or whenever it was. Memorial Day, we always had our baccalaureate services. And after I graduated, then I went back down and signed up, and I couldn't get in until about the middle of June because he had to keep up his quotas for enlistments. And about the middle of June, I was sent to Denver to take the oath to go in the Navy. And I went in on what they call a minority cruise. It was a kid hitch because you went in when my dad had to sign for me because I was only 17 years old. And on a minority cruise, your enlistment expires when you're 21 years old. But the national emergency, that lasted a little longer than that.
As a navigator, you were pretty good at your job, huh?
Oh, I had to be, I should say, because we flew out of Walla Walla, Washington there, and we flew the Cascades, patrolled the Cascades. It turns out that the Japanese sent thousands of balloons with incendiary bombs over to the United States to start fires in our forests, in our cities, and disrupt the war effort. And we were looking for those balloons, and the gunners would try to explode the incendiary bombs before they hit the ground. So my job was to make sure we didn't hit any mountains while they were diverting the airplane toward those balloons. And boy, do I remember those mountains. Mount Shasta, Mount Lassen, Mount Jefferson, Mount Hood, Mount Adams, Mount Rainier. So I was really careful, had to be careful, know where we were every second of the time so we didn't hit those mountains while we were looking for those Japanese balloons. Depending upon your altitude, if you could see them against the sky, they were easier to spot, but against the ground, they were hard to find. Our whole squadron was out looking for them, so some of the planes were very effective and were able to stop any disruption of our military effort here in the United States. Here's the B-24J, and it has a double tail, and it has a nose turret up here, and then there's a ball turret down here, and here's the tail gun down here. And I was in the nose, and I'll tell you about our crew. The pilot was 23, the co-pilot was 20, I was 19, I was the navigator. The bombardier, the northern bomb sight with visual, was 23. The flight engineer was 20. All the gunners were 18, except for the tail gunner, Peter Polinsky. He was 25. He was the old man of the crew. We were detailed to Langley Field, Virginia, if you can imagine, going from Walla Walla, Washington, to Langley Field, Virginia. And our task there was to search for German submarines in the Atlantic Ocean at night. Now, we had a completely different B-24 then, called the B-24N, and it was the same as the Navy privateer. But our plane was painted totally black, had a single tail, and I was no longer in the nose because it was loaded with radar and LORAN, long-range navigation. And we had a radar altimeter for the pilots because we were flying at 500 feet over the black Atlantic Ocean at night, searching for the German submarines. The German submarines, during the day, ran silently on batteries, but at night they had to come up and charge those batteries with their diesels, and that was why we had the tactic to fly at night at 500 feet, searching for those German submarines. But we had to be very careful because the whole idea was to surprise the Germans. We did have radar, and we now had a radar bombardier, not the northern bomb sight bombardier. And he could bomb by radar without ever visually seeing the target. But we had to be careful because if they were ready for us, we're at 500 feet, and we would be really an easy target for a deck gunner on a submarine.
Right after we finished boot camp, you got to go home for a week, and so we back to Farragut, and I think right toward the end of December, I was put on a train and sent to San Diego at the old San Diego Naval Hospital in Balboa Park, and at that time, that was the largest, most modern naval hospital in the world. And so we were put into quarters there, I believe it was December the 30th, 29th, the 30th, right at the end of the year. First thing, training is a 6-week training to be a naval hospital corpsman. And of course, they all tell you that it's all cram course. You know, if it's 6 weeks, it might be a 3-month training, but we're going to do it in 6 weeks. And I guess they really needed corpsmen at that time, so it was really a bunch of us, and they was trying to get us through the training and out in the field. They put me on hospital OR tech school, which was I think that was a 6-month training course, and you were trained to be an operating room technician. We had 4 major operating rooms in the Naval Hospital there, and they had surgery scheduled every day, 4 or 5 times, so they was probably doing maybe 15 or 20 operations a day there. I was always on duty and further transfer, which meant that you never knew where you was going and how long you was going to be there. And I think it was because they were short of hospital corpsmen, and so you had to be prepared to get packed up and gone within an hour. And so after I got done in all my tech work in San Diego at the Naval Hospital, they sent me to a hospital called Shoemaker Hospital. But I stayed there for a while, and then after that I went to Small Craft Training Center in the San Diego area there, and prepared to go overseas. And I was assigned to the USS Burleson, APA 67, which was a brand new ship. But anyway, after we had the commissioning, we met up with 2 or 3, 4, whatever other APAs and destroyer escorts. We wound up to in the South Pacific in an island called Tulagi, and they went from there to Guadalcanal. And with my group, they had about 6 corpsmen and a doctor, and we went and had, I don't know, it must have been 100 Marines. Then when we got out of there, and we went on up to Kwajalein, and again the same thing, pick up troops and so forth. But then we were sent on to Ulithi, which was a staging area, and there were thousands of ships and men, hundreds of thousands of men, ready to go into Okinawa. I was transferred at that point to the submarine service, and I was transferred to the USS Fulton AS-11, which is an assault submarine force, and the home base was Guam there, and we had 13 submarines that was going out of Guam on out.
The Navy Task Force had us surrounded, and so did the B-29s flying over, and submarines. All of them they're giving us coverage to protect us because we were in troop ships, and you might say that we didn't have the facilities to fight back. So the Navy wanted to get us in there, so did the Air Force, and the submarines, the force wanted to get us in there. And the submarines picked us up in the Marshall Islands. The reason we had to take Iwo Jima was because that was the shortest route to Japan for the B-29s, because they were loaded with bombs and they burned a lot of fuel, especially when they would rise in elevation to get away from any aircraft. And there were some anti-aircraft on Iwo Jima. So anyway, we heard how the B-29s would fly into Japan and then circle around, come back, and before they could make it even before Iwo Jima, they would crash land out there in the water. And the crew disappeared. The Navy come out there with BTYs, the BBYs. That's that little ship. It looks like a ship, but it's a plane, to pick up what they could find of the B-29 crew in the cold water, which was February 19th when all this was taking place. And it was miserably cold out there. And so they had a feeling the rest of the crew went rounded out there in that water. So when we heard this, we were going to take Iwo Jima. And so I landed on the 8 o'clock in the morning on the 19th of February, and I was 19 years old. And I landed on, well, I was not on Red Beach yet. I was still way out there, maybe 500, 600 yards yet. And so between there and the beach, here's what took place. There was a huge battleship parked in front of the beach, parallel to the beach. Maybe there were about 300 to 400 yards between the beach and the Tennessee battleship. And we were to go around. We split up. Part of my company went around the bow, and we went around the stern. And then we were to crawl alongside of the Tennessee battleship and get under the turret guns, which is a 14 and 16-inch turret guns. And that's where we were lined up and facing the beach, ready to move in. So between what happened in that area, the first thing that happened was an Amtrak came around the bow. I saw that, came around the bow and turned and come down alongside, and it got hit. And it blew that thing completely out of the water. I mean, it was gone. And nobody came back up. Then the next thing that happened was the there another Amtrak about, well, maybe 10, 15 feet from me. Well, then that took a hit, and it blew that thing to sky high, and there was bodies flying everywhere. That makes the second one. The third one on the other side of me, we were looking at each other. We knew that the possibility was that we were next, because I nailed the one at the bow, and then I nailed the one about 15 feet from me. So we figured we were next. And the shell landed, I had my arm over the railing because I wanted to see ahead what I would have to do when I hit that beach. The shell landed within a foot of me and exploded under the water. And before that, at the same time, this was happening all at the same time. A Navy dive bomber was flying over, and he was coming right straight at us with these wing guns firing. And we figured that he was gone and froze to the trigger. And so I had my leg over the side of that Amtrak. I was ready to get out of there. And before I could make another move, he was over me, about as high as the ceiling. And the gunner behind him looked down at us, and I know what happened, what he was thinking. I'm going down with my commander, one way or another. I'm going down. The dive bomber crash landed right into that Amtrak to my left. And so both of them went up in black smoke and yellow. It was a huge explosion because that dive bomber still had a bomb under the fuselage, still carrying the bomb. And we had, there's two Navy destroyers. We were going in, both of them fired rockets from those cruisers and destroyers, one after another. I don't know how many rockets were in the air. Iwo Jima, if you excuse me, was catching hell from everybody. They were keeping Iwo Jima pinned down, keep the Japanese pinned down, so that we could get in. And so our Amtrak got in and went parallel to the beach. The rear gate opened up and out we came. And I got about 10 feet from my Amtrak, and I got hit in the hip. And the shell went through my canteen and my cup, and it did not penetrate my body, but it did give me a lot of damage on my hip. And I had a hard time for 2 or 3 days getting around. But there was another guy laying around on the floor, on the ground, rolling around at the end of the airstrip. And I could see smoke coming off of his body. And alongside of Motoyama Airfield number 1, we were there for a good 3-4 days. I'll say 4 days that we were along the airstrip there on Motoyama Airfield. We had a hell of a battle going on in that particular area, and it was 24 hours a day fighting. This is the way we got replenished all the time, because we were all throwing grenades into caves and securing them. And what we had to do, we had to fire our rifle at least 3 times, if not 4, into the cave to drive the Japanese back into that cave so that they couldn't throw the grenade back out. That's what they were doing. After we finally took the island, which was on the 26th of March, and our commander says, okay, let's head back. Well, we had 5 miles to go to get back to Mount Suribachi. And as we were marching back, we heard the muffling of gunfire, rifle fire, and so on. At first, we couldn't figure out, where's that coming from? What is it? We realized after we had walked about a mile or so, 1.5 miles, then we realized that the Japanese were committing suicide in the caves as we were walking by. I would say from the 19th of February to the 26th of March, there was no rest, no sleep hardly at all. We just more or less had the rifle, in this position, and if you took a quick snooze, that's what you did.
First place I went up by ship up the coastline of Japan. We landed at Okinawa first, and went in an LST into Okinawa. An LST is a flat-bottom boat. This flat-bottom boat would open up, the doors would open up this way. This is the front. And the panel would go down. And they'd drive trucks and tanks off of it, right onto the ground. So when we got to Okinawa, there was going to be a tornado. So they made us go back out to sea. They said these flat-bottom boats can end up on the beach in a tornado. So for 2 days, I didn't get out of my bunk. I was so seasick because of the tornado. And anyway, eventually I ended up in Tokyo Bay, and it was around Thanksgiving. And I met an old friend of mine, a young friend of mine, who was a cook in the Navy, and I had turkey for Thanksgiving on a ship with him. His name was Marty Katz. He lived up the street from me in Brooklyn. And then I was sent to a place called Ominato, which was on the main island where Tokyo is, and by rail it took 24 hours going up north and then west to get to the peninsula where this Japanese air base was that we had taken over. And I was stationed there for a couple months, 3 months, 4 months, doing photographic work. I had my rating, a third class petty officer, which is equivalent to people who don't know petty officer as opposed to Army. It's the same as a buck sergeant, a 3-striper, but you have 1 stripe in the Navy. And I worked in the photo lab there. We had a photo interpretation squadron, and we did training, but it wasn't any more for invasion training. It was just regular Navy training. And I was there until I got transferred to Guam, the Photo Interpretation Squadron, it's called, which also produced pictures and flew around photographing of Japan and other places. I'd have to put my flight time in. And, well, they are the equivalent medals of these ribbons of places I've been stationed at. And none of them are for war or anything. Well, yeah, they are actually. They have American Theater, the Asiatic Pacific, the multi is the occupation forces in Japan. I had, with my rifle, I was an expert rifleman, and the honorable discharge. I enjoyed being in the Navy. For me, it was a nice life, but couldn't wait to get home.
I went overseas from San Francisco and went to Milne Bay in New Guinea and was there for a short amount of time, a couple of weeks. And then I was sent down to Brisbane, Australia, to a supply base down in Brisbane, Australia, which was very plush duty. Then I was eventually sent back up to New Guinea for a short period of time again, and then to the Admiralty Islands, where I went aboard a ship there called the YF-619, which YF stands for Yard Freighter, a very glamorous name. It was about a 300-foot long double-deck barge is really what it was. And we didn't have a propeller, didn't have a screw or anything. So we had to be towed wherever we went. So we followed the battles up the Pacific, and we came in 50 miles or so, 75 miles behind the action. And then as they became disabled, they'd come back and get the parts from us. Interesting, when we were towed, the tow boat was ordered to cut us loose if we were under attack from a submarine. And the theory there was that we had such a shallow draft, flat bottom, that a torpedo could not reach that high under us, whereas the towboat could be sunk. So fortunately, we were never attacked. So, well, aboard this YF 619, a friend of mine had this monkey. I don't know how he got it. I haven't any idea. But it was a very small little monkey. His name was Charlie. And so he got transferred, and he couldn't take it with him. So I inherited the monkey.
I was a radioman, and I'd made radioman second during the war. And when I went back in Korea, I came out as a radioman first class. I was on the ship. I was put in commission in July 1944 and was on it to the remainder of the war until December 45. Yeah. And we saw quite a bit of action. We operated with the carriers a lot because it was a new ship. And we could keep up with the carriers when they were launching and landing planes. And we had quite a bit of armament as far as they were concerned, rather than lesser models or older models, because we had twin mounts on the forward. We had two twin mounts. It was a destroyer, very maneuverable, and yeah. And we were cited for, by the Secretary of the Navy, cited us for our combat duty during radar picket duty off Okinawa. We had to deal with kamikaze. That was the biggest enemy we had to. Kamikazes are suicide airplanes, and they dive into you. We were with a ship called the Dexter when she went down, and just as I stepped out there, I could see the bow of the ship going down and people in the water. I could hear the engines changing rhythm from the captain changing, trying to get as close as he could, and we threw off all our rafts and lifesavers. When they were landing the troops in Okinawa, they needed some protection against the enemy coming in and attacking them, and we were on the outside boundaries keeping the planes from going in.
This jacket is what we wore around the base, underneath the, well, most of the time around the base, and of course underneath the heavy jackets with the fleece. But this over here is the insignia of the Army Air Corps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is my rank up here, First Lieutenant. And over here, this is for the 4th Air Force, which was the Air Force that we flew in around protecting the United States of America. Here are my wings, my navigator wings, and then this is a depiction of the B-24 bomber.
So how did you earn first lieutenant?
Well,
Age 19, was it?
At 19. Well, I was out by the time I was 20, so it's just progression of being able to do the job, and finally, after a period of time, they say, well, you're doing okay, we'll give you a promotion. And I was called up for the Korean War, but I was working at Office Field, California, for the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, which became NASA. And the director sent a letter to the Army that I was in a crucial job classification, so I didn't have to go to the Korean War. I had the opportunity when I worked for Lockheed and other companies to go to Washington, D.C. much later and give talks at the Pentagon regarding some of the things we were doing. And you see generals and admirals all over the place. And here's a lieutenant colonel that we were meeting with. And lieutenant colonel is fairly high. Guess where his office was? in the basement.
Aw.
So that shows you about how important I might have been as a first lieutenant. We had navigation. We'd go into the navigation training area and you could see all the stars. We kept shooting the stars. And also we had a tower for practicing bombing, and I was a backup bombardier. So, well, I might say that my claim to fame, since you asked how important I was,
Okay.
I bombed the United States.
And how did that happen?
Well, it turns out that it was my turn to be the bombardier, and it was at night. And the target was all lit up so we could see it. And there I am working the northern bomb site, and it had concentric dials for the two of them for the right hand and two of them for the left hand. And you're going back and forth with, you had to really be fairly agile with your fingers in order to keep your crosshairs on the target. And so it came time for the bomb to go, and I said, bombs away. But it hung up, the bomb hung up in the bomb bay. And I called the pilot, I said, oh, we're hung up. And so what he did, as we left the bombing range, this was in Boardman, Oregon, centrifugal force took the bomb out. And I said, uh-oh, I'm in trouble now. And fortunately, though, I told the debriefing officer about the bomb. The next morning, there was an article in the paper said, unknown missile crashes through roof of tavern. That's right. The B-24 was designed and built by Consolidated Aircraft Company in San Diego, California, and Fort Worth, Texas. And pretty well hand-built. And they needed more of these bombers. They were heavier, and they carried a heavier bomb load than the B-17 and were faster. So they went to the Ford Motor Company in Willow Run, Michigan, to build them. And the production line was a mile long, and there were more B-24s built than any other warplane during World War II. But you know, we'd be on the runway, the head of the runway, getting ready to take off, and as the pilot would push the throttles forward, sometimes he would say, let's see if this old Ford will fly. We've had emergency landings too. We landed at Luke Field, Arizona on emergency landing one time, and it's a fighter pilot station. And all the fighter pilots came out to see the B-24. And as we were getting out of the plane, there's 10, the crew was 10 of us. The fighter pilots were all counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people on this bomber. And then came time to take off, and the runways were fairly short at the fighter fields. Mm-hmm. So they all came out to see us if we were going to be able to take off or not. And well, let me just recount what happened one time. We're on the strafing range, and we're at 500 feet, and the gunners are all strafing with their machine guns. And we got a engine on fire. Well, 500 feet, an engine on fire is pretty bad. Can't bail out. And and what are you going to do? You can really have problems. But the pilot started climbing. He went up to 2,500 feet, and he dove the airplane and got really high speed and blew out the flame because of the air blowing by so quickly. And we were going back to Walla Walla, Washington, and we pointed out we had an emergency, clear us to land directly. And we were on 3 engines, and we landed, and there was the fire trucks, and there were the ambulances and everything like that. And we looked at the engine, and there was oil all over that engine that had caught on fire. But fortunately, we got it out and made it back safely. He was from Louisiana. The co-pilot was from Georgia. Some of the gunners were from New York. And then Peter Polinsky was from Hamtramck, close to Detroit, I think. And then we had a fellow from Utah. I was from Colorado. So we had quite a crew from almost everywhere in the United States. We were up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and we had the general briefing at 5 in the morning. Then we broke up into the separate groups, bombardiers, navigators, gunners, and I plotted our course, had time to plot the course and make sure that if I pre-flighted my part of the airplane, that all my instruments were working. We took off at 8 then in the morning and flew for 6 hours, landed at 2 in the afternoon, and then we debriefed for another hour, and then finally we're off the next day, and we flew every other day rather than every day.
Did you ever try piloting?
Oh yeah. So there, the pilot was really careful. He said, if something happens to me, we've got to get back, get the rest of the crew back. So he sat me down in the co-pilot seat and said, now you're going, I could fly the B-24 level fairly easy. He said, now you're going to land it. So now I'm coming up on the runway, and all of a sudden the runway's over here. So I give it right rudder. We didn't have hydraulics, so you just had to really use your strength. And then I gave it right rudder. Now the runway's over here. No, it's over here. I couldn't line the plane up with the runway. And then we're going down, getting closer to the runway, and the co-pilot's calling out the airspeed. 150, 140, 130, 125, 120. Get the nose down. With that, I jumped out of the co-pilot's seat and I said, oh, take over. So I never did land the B-24. Sometimes we had a hard landing, and then we'd say, that was the co-pilot that landed that time. About war, and we're doing that, but there's a funny feeling somehow within you, what would happen to those Germans if we sank them? And then we think about what would happen to us if they shot us down. Panic and terror and suffering, and it's a terrible thing, and so I didn't want anyone to think I was glorifying war in any way.
This ship being brand new, we was out only a couple of days, and we had difficulty. Kind of funny. The ship started shaking like that, and the propeller was loose. We had to go back to the small craft training center for a couple of days, and so the rest of the guys slowed down in convoy because they still had submarines out in the area that was dangerous to us. So anyway, after a couple of days, they fixed our ship, and we hurried back out to get to the convoy, and they slowed down, but we never did catch them. And one of the craziest things that happened, when you're training, you wouldn't believe it. Now, on Thanksgiving Day, they had a schedule. You had to go to an autopsy. Can you believe it, on Thanksgiving Day at 7 in the morning? So we had to go, part of training, go through that. So then you'll get done with that, and you're supposed to go in and have Thanksgiving dinner, you know. So then on April the 1st, 1945, April Fool's Day, Easter Sunday, and that was when we made the invasion in Okinawa. In the early stages, before, you always had the supply ships in first, closest, and then the troops and so forth, and back behind you had destroyers, you had cruisers, you had battleships, and there was just a constant barrage of shelling day and night, 24 hours a day over the top of you. We was fairly close to the island so that we could get our troops in. We had kamikazes flying over several times, and at that point, the pilots were strapped in the planes, and they were actually suicide bombers trying to bomb on the ship. So, you know, there's so much happening all the time, you don't think about anything. You know, you just do what you're told to do and get her done, you know. And so the only thing that I do remember is in Maha, in Okinawa, the river that ran from the capital up and down into the ocean, and they didn't have any casualties start going in. It all happened on in farther. And so we had some LCVPs, which is landing craft vehicles, which are small boats they can get into shore. And so we was 4 or 5 of us corpsmen were assigned to go in with they had other APAs around too doing the same thing. So we went up the river a little bit, and they brought the wounded back and on stretchers, and they laid them along the bank there, and we would pick them up and then take them out to the hospital ship.
And the B-29 that was in the front, I was watching him coming in. The other 2 went down, and he was coming in, and the nose of that B-29 was pretty much level with me. I thought, oh my God, he's not going to make it. And I was watching, and the nose of that B-29 hit the end of the airstrip, bounced up and skidded into a bomb hole, and all the way across to the other side of that bomb hole, and skidded and picked up the nose again. And he skidded till he stopped right out in front of me, right straight in front of me, maybe 50 feet from me. I never heard so many bullets hitting the B-29, the body of a B-29. It was just riddling with the Japanese fire. And the crew all ran out, jumped out, ran all in all kinds of directions. And, one of the guys, I went like this, that I had cover. And he started running towards me. And he jumped down beside me and he hit me on the back. He says, "Damn, am I glad to see you." And then when we got to the ship, our troop ship, we boarded. We were going up this steel ladder to get on deck. And there were 2 Higgins boats parked alongside the troop ship with wounded Marines on board. The Navy personnel, they were so careful handling those wounded guys. I mean, some of those guys, some of their legs were dangling about half off, And to see those guys, those Navy corpsmen, I'll never forget them. They were so concerned about handling a wounded Marine. It was precious. And in Suribachi, we had a battle that was going on for at least 2 to 3 days in that area. And finally, my commander yelled out, "I need some volunteers. We need to have some more support on the Mount Suribachi, the top of Mount Suribachi." And I says, "I'll go, sir." And so I ran over there and I started climbing up the side of the mountain. Guess who? Here comes Ira Hayes. So we both climbed the mountain together. And we got maybe 10 feet below where the flag went up finally. So what happened was that there were snipers all over that mountain. And you could see the thing which you had to do was look for blue smoke, which came out of those caves from rifle fire. And so what happened was we had to help the guys there was about 4 to 6 guys at that time trying to raise that flag. That flag was so big, 4x8 flag. And the wind was blowing that flag around so strong, it was actually moving those guys around. They had a hard time trying to get that pipe up into the air. And Ira, he says to me, he says, "I think I'll go up and help them raise that pipe." And I said, "You go for it, Ira. I'll cover you." He said, "Okay," and he took off. And he got up there. So that's why you see the statue of the flag raising, the hands in the air like this. That's Ira Hayes.